Hello, everybody. It's Marcy from wavesofcommunication.com. Welcome to another episode of the Language Facilitation Helpline podcast, and thank you for tuning in today. The fastest results come when you enjoy the process of language facilitation. Welcome to the Language Facilitation Helpline podcast and the Waves of Communication YouTube channel. Today, I have an amazing spotlight interview for you with Avi, who is a language facilitation practitioner. And I just called her that because I just made up the title because of who she is. And I'm going to invite her to tell us about how she got her job as a language facilitation practitioner. And we're going to get into a conversation about what that means and how you can find your own language facilitation practitioner.
I actually used the website care.com, which, not to sound like an advertisement, but I would definitely recommend, quite frankly, because it's the way we did it is essentially I just sort of listed not just my qualifications, but my attitudes. And I think that everybody who's already here knows that the concept of language facilitation is not the most mainstream way of working with Gestalt learners. And I don't happen to agree with the majority of the mainstream ways, so I sort of put that out there first and foremost. I was like, I pride myself on listening to children and like hearing what they have to say and not forcing them to do things. And I was able to connect with this lovely woman who we had a fantastic conversation where I talked about the fact that the reason I was in the industry was because I struggle with a lot of the same things that autistic people do, and I get it, and she thought that that was a positive rather than a negative, because I'd been in a lot of work situations where that was like, oh, well, if you're one of them, how are you going to do the job kind of situation, which I think is completely counterintuitive, because it does nothing but help me do the job. So we talked and we set up a first meeting where I met her lovely son, I don't know what my charge, I suppose.
He's our late talker. He's the late talker of
our late talker, yes, who is, in my opinion, a very kind and intelligent young man. And we warmed up to each other, not to pat myself on the back, but according to his mother, very, very quickly for his usual time frame. And at that point, she was like, we need to have you back, because I was able to connect to him more effectively than certain professionals had in the past.
Yeah, and I can just imagine her going through that care.com, because that's where I sent her, is out to find someone. And I sent her to find someone without degrees, without, that was really interested in connecting and caring for kids.
Glad you did. You got me a job.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I sent her out to find you, because
care.com is a really nice resource, because I think you really get to cater what you're looking for in both a client and an employer, which when you're working in an industry where who you hire is really so important. I mean, they're going to have a permanent effect on your child's development. You don't want to hire some schmo, It's good to be able to look over the credentials properly and their attitudes and really think, okay, this is a person who I'm comfortable spending time with my child.
Yeah, and even if so my audience is all over the world, and if you don't have care.com, that's the real thing. You got to both present your needs, not just, again, we're not looking for somebody with experience or even all of that, while all of that contributes, but what it is those qualities. I love that that's what you said, because I think too, isn't it what you're looking for in a client? Like if you worked with somebody who has a late talker and they expected you to do ABA at home, that would not be a good match for your way of caring. And it certainly wouldn't be a good match for a language facilitator. And I think that's what's been happening, is a lot of the people that are signing on to work with me are in the same position as your clients. So these are language facilitator parents, you guys, who don't have the time every day, all day, or their kids are spending time in schools where they're not getting everything they need. And this is supplemental time. How much time do you spend with this family now that you're their actual embedded practitioner and on a
Yeah.
regular schedule?
So I have to work around school. I go to college right now. But she usually has me work in 3-hour spans after he gets home from uh school. Right now I'm working 3 days a week, but I think next semester the plan is to up it to 5 because my classes will be different. But it's not, I feel like it's not really comparable to a lot of the other therapies like ABA and stuff because it's really not terribly intensive. It's most of it is just doing things he enjoys with a conversation. So, I think it's not like it's a 3-hour class every single day of the week. You know what I mean? We're
Right?
mostly
No, I
just
get
hanging
it. I
out.
mean, I think it's
Yeah.
amazing. Remember, we're talking about this is a and you spend 3 hours at a time, so
Hmm.
you have the opportunity in that 3 hour stretch to work through all kinds of things, like whatever it is, because no one activity is three. How old is this late talker we're talking about?
9 years old.
9 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so he has a full school day, and you see him after school. And then I expect in the summer or, different
Yes.
semesters, there will be other times. Excellent. And so I want to dial back a little bit to talk a little bit more about you. You said that you're in
Oh,
college.
wow.
What are you studying? What's your background as far as
So,
interest?
um, this may strike people as a little odd, but now that I'm here, I would love to actually talk about it. I am going in for anthropology, not psychology. And people sort of think, oh well, if you want to work with autistic people, isn't the corner psychology? But my attitude is very much that a lot of these things, especially with a late talker, they're not as much medical as they are cultural, because there are things that are expected of children that are they're not necessarily true to what every child is able to do. There's way more late talkers, there's way more gestalt learners than media and whatnot would have you believe. And the things that people suggest they can't do because of it are almost always fictitious. Oh, they don't understand, they can't do this, they can't do that. They absolutely can. I've worked with quite a lot of late talkers by now. And so I'm coming from an anthropological perspective with the attitude that we create disability. It is not a thing that is innate in human beings, and I think the way to undo it is not to fix it. I'm very, very strictly anti cure for autism. I don't think that's a real thing that is even feasible. I think they're absolutely perfect, and telling them they need a cure is very unkind. Because imagine if somebody saw your personality and was like, "Oh, we can fix that." It's like that's how I am. What do you mean? It's just so disrespectful. So I come at things from this angle of, okay, how do we get this person to where they want to be, even if our culture says that that's not where they're supposed to be? Because everybody
Right.
wants different things out of life, even if they're
That's
not
right.
what you're told you should want out of life. I went through
Yeah.
a
And
very
how fun.
unconventional path.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and how fun is it to be just in a role where you get to help a kid be himself,
Oh, it's
whoever
awesome.
he is,
It's
learn his
awesome.
thing. Yeah, and I bet that he's interested in learning about some anthropology things that you are, while you're studying and doing your homework. I have heard a story
Yeah.
about French, as a matter of fact, that you were sort of studying French in one of those moments that this little guy sort of wasn't in the mood to connect, and you used that I am just going to practice my thing over here as a way to sort of low key get him to pay attention to you. Can you tell that story?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I'm trying to think of what you're referring to. French.
You said you were going on a walk. You were going on a walk, and
No,
he
I think
was
that was
like,
my Spanish, actually.
"Oh,
Um,
Spanish." I knew that it was a foreign language. I knew that it
Yeah,
was a foreign
yeah.
language. That's
So
what I
my
remember.
my
But
my sub focus in college is languages. I speak quite a few languages, not very well, but because it's my interest, I learn bits and pieces. So I figured, it's New York. Everybody and their mother speaks Spanish. I should probably get around to learning it. And there was a day when, so, uh, the boy I work with is definitely a person who appreciates and needs alone time. So while my job is talking to him, he's not always, even with me, in a place to socially open up. And I respect that from a source of personal experience, because when I was his age, he likes to go for a walk every day after school. And I remember when I was his age, my walk after school was I'd pop in my headphones, and if my family offered to come with me, I'd kind of be like, well, thank you, but this is where I go for a walk. So out of that point of sympathy, I generally um, don't force him to be social if he doesn't feel like it. So that day I was kind of like, you know what? It seems like you are not in the mood for interpersonal talking, but I hear you talking to yourself. And I think that talking to yourself is so helpful because it helps you practice the words you've learned. Because sometimes he'll mutter to himself, but I know from his intonation he's not talking to me, because he's gotten a lot better at showing when he's talking to you. And I was like, okay, if you're going to mutter to yourself, I also have to practice my words, only I'm going to practice them in Spanish. And so we spent essentially the whole walk not speaking to one another, but I was just kind of running my vocab, and he, I knew, was doing the same thing in English. Is he was just sort of making these very soft sounds that very clearly weren't, he didn't want attention drawn to, but he was trying to process, and it was lovely for me as well, you know. Um,
Yeah,
and
I think what that shows is how this process works, right? You mentioned yourself that you were a late talker. You know, you have your own emotions and situations kind of like that. And it wasn't necessarily because you couldn't. It was more, especially in this kind of case, that you really weren't so interested in engaging with people unless they met you where you were. And sometimes you didn't even want them to meet you. You just really needed your own time because you were processing. I think kids
it,
like this little
yeah,
guy that we're talking about and you sometimes get things going that just go too much in your brain.
yes,
It's just going and going and going and going, and we're processing all this thoughts or learning or whatever we've been doing, and you can't do that while people are talking to you. You
yeah.
know,
It's
you need
funny.
to
I
have
feel like such a great link between him and his mom. They're both wonderful people. But his mother, bless her heart, I don't know how she does it. Nothing seems to overstimulate her ever. And I'm fairly easily overstimulated by new things, and she'll
yeah.
just sort of go on this roll of like, and then at 4 we'll do this, and then at 5 we'll do this, and then the next week we're going to do this, and then we can do blah 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 blah. And he'll start to get visibly stressed out, and she kind of is like, well, it's all fun stuff. Why is he? And I'm kind of like, whoa, like like I appreciate so much that she does things that he's gonna love, and that
Yeah.
she wants him to be engaged and have a great life. But at the same time, I think to myself, if my mom had scheduled all this for me, I would be like needing to catch my breath of like, yes, it's all fun, but at the same time, some people need more time to recover from anything, no matter how fun, than other people. And it's funny because
Right.
I wasn't by the books, I think, a late talker, but I think language is so many more things than people give it credit for. Because I
Yeah.
understood grammar very quickly. In fact, in that sense, I was an early talker. But people act like that's the only facet of language that influences how you talk. It was the social element, it was the interpersonal element, it was an
Right.
emotional element. And that stuff, I think people overlook in a lot of late talkers, because they just sort of go to this very, very clinical, medical, oh, he can't talk, there's something wrong with his brain, he wants to talk, he's like as if he's trapped in there. Whereas a lot of people with limited verbal capacity that I've met, you know, they have had it was a mix between not being able to talk and having certain motivations to talk less, you
Right.
know? And a
I
lot of
agree.
times,
I think that there are a lot of things, and again, all those things that you're
yeah,
talking about that usually happen when kids are late talking to them. They're judged, they're
yeah,
pigeonholed, they're talked down to, they're labeled, and right in front of them. People talk like they're not able to listen and process and
yeah,
understand these
oh
things.
my
But
gosh.
this 9-year-old child that you're working with clearly understands everything, doesn't he?
Oh, absolute. He's very clearly got a lot of insecurities, and I think that's a bigger obstacle than his actual understanding of language, because he's very, very bright. He understand, like, and I'm not just saying that because like, oh, he's my special boy. No, he understands. He's a very clearly a STEM kid in training. loves science, very like ahead of his grade for a neurotypical kid in math, like
Right.
very, very bright. But none of that matters if he's not comfortable around you, or if you make a comment about him, even if to you it feels neutral. I have a thing where a lot of the times, I like to keep his mother updated on how things went, but even if it's positive, I never I've learned that I can't talk about it with her while he's still in the house. I'll text it to her, because if it's anything other than he did perfect, he did great, even if in our eyes it's neutral, of like, oh, we had a little trouble with this, but it's okay, he'll immediately like show signs of distress, be very upset.
Yeah,
And
I think
it's
that's a
so,
trauma. I think that's a trauma response from it happening so many times in the past, because it's not
yeah,
typical for kids to respond so sensitively to those kinds of constructive criticisms, like this was hard, but
yeah,
he's working. I mean, most people are like they appreciate the fact that I'm working, but kids who have trauma of being judged, they jump onto it was hard and they get stuck with
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
I
So
think
I
that
love how
people,
you are filtering
yeah,
what you're
I,
saying
I,
with
I,
him.
I never tell him, anything that could make him insecure. I never tell him that I have to do for my work, like the little review at the end, because I don't want him to feel like he's being graded,
Yeah.
all that stuff. He's,
Yeah,
and
because even if you have, this is the other thing. Like, let's say you show up on a day, especially now that you're going to be going 5 days a week, and he's in a crummy mood and he doesn't want to do anything, you
yeah,
know, fun or not. What do you do then?
it's hard sometimes, because I never want to feel like I'm just ignoring him, because I know that's not, perhaps this is too clinical, but there is a degree to which I have some integrity. I'm being paid to be there. I don't want to be on my phone the whole time.
Right?
But at the same time, he's a person where, and I don't know if this is because of his past, because he had some more conventional therapies when he was younger. He's a person where he, if he's not in the mood to be made to do things, he gets very angry that you're trying to make him do things. And
Yeah.
so there are a lot of kids I've met where you can sort of coax them, where it would be like, oh, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, that's stupid, and you kind of go, oh, we'll just do one and see if you like it, and then they forget that they didn't want to do it, and all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
doing the art project and everything's hunky
Yeah.
dory. My student is absolutely not like that. He will sort of start with a tepid refusal of whatever it is, and then when I insist, it'll be a lot of like this very, very clear, I said no, you know? And for a boy who's got some problems with boundaries, I've sort of communicated to his mother that I'm not going to be comfortable pushing those boundaries, because he needs to have them up and he needs to trust me. And there are times when he will want to be alone in his room, and if I'm sort of lingering outside the door, because I'm supposed to keep an eye on him, he'll do a great job telling me to get out. And that sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but it's not. He communicates it very effectively, and that's huge. But at the
Right.
same
And this
time,
is it. I mean, we're talking about a late talker, and the purpose of you being there is to facilitate
yeah,
functional speech. And this get out of my room
yeah,
is literally a dream come true for this mom. Even though it's not what you want to hear, you facilitated that functional speech with this Gestalt learner, because remember, we don't only talk about fun and nice things. In
see,
fact,
I
I
think
venture
it's
to
so
say
important that you
we
say
talk
that.
more about the things we complain about and we're struggling through and we're processing than we do, oh, I love this. I mean, we say that a lot more. We talk a lot more
And
about
I think
our
that's one of the
problem
one of
solving.
the biggest things is, I used to work at a place, and I will not bring up the name because I don't want to disparage anybody, but I worked at a place with much more conventional attitudes about late talkers, and I recently left, partially because of that, because I think they were very disrespectful. Um, but a big problem was, there is this assumption that, in my opinion, is very manipulative, that everything you want to hear from the kid is progress, and everything you don't want to hear from the kid, they don't know what they're talking about. like they're just confused. And I think when you have a late learner, one of the things you absolutely must accept is if you actually want an independent, communicative kid, sometimes they're going to say stuff that annoys you and pisses you off. And if you can't confess that, then they're always going to feel belittled.
There is room to connect through everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You connect through the annoyance. You connect
Yeah.
through the thing. So if they're annoyed with you, you say, "Oh, now I see what I'm doing right now is annoying to you." And then you have a choice. Do you keep doing that annoying thing or do you stop doing it? And then the late talker says, "Oh my goodness, now my communication is appropriate. I said I don't like you doing that. You stop doing it. Now the trust bubble is bigger."
I mean, the thing
Right?
is, one of the most important facets of communicating, period, the first thing you communicate for when you're a baby is, I don't like this, change it. And if they learn to communicate that and you ignore them, why the heck would you expect them to keep communicating? That's like numero uno. And we had a really powerful day that day, because the reason I had pissed him off, or ticked him off, so to say, is because I had um, gone in his room after he pretty clearly did not want me in there. And it was because I was in this position of like feeling like I was supposed to handle the situation better, and I was feeling guilty because I was concerned I was doing nothing. But I acknowledged afterward, and because he became very upset once I did so, because I had asked and he said no, and I did it anyway. And I was like, that was not right. And we went on a walk, and our walks are where we often talk about deep things. And I was kind of like, we had both annoyed each other. That was part of the problem, is he sometimes hits when he's mad. And I was kind of like, okay, well, first things first, I need you to like not hit me. You can always tell me what it is you're thinking, but it's just it's hurtful to hit people. And he knew that, and he apologized. And then I said, I tried to be very sincere, and I said, that said, I understand why you're mad, and you're right. I shouldn't have gone in your room. I wouldn't have liked that if I were on the other end, and I completely get why you were mad. And it was so much more effective to do it like that, because when he wants to either apologize or say thank you, a lot of times something he'll do is sort of give this contact on the arm. It's like a physical cue that I've gotten very accustomed to as a sorry or a thank you, and he started sort of doing that and like leaning into me and stuff. And I was like, see, like if I had just glossed over this and gone, I was right, you were wrong, how is he going to trust me again? How is he going to trust me if I didn't own up and say, sometimes I'm going to do things that aren't right, and I need to apologize just like you need to apologize when you do something that's not right. How can we ever expect to do any progress if from the get-go we're not equals? That's sort of how I attack the problem.
I
You know?
love it. And everybody makes mistakes. You make
Yeah,
mistakes, he makes mistakes, and I think when we all own up to what we do, that's what builds that trust and that bond together
yeah,
with you. Yeah, I love that. We had talked before about how this child, and I think all late talkers, are so discerning about who they will trust, and it really does happen over time.
absolutely.
Showing up over and over with them because they remember. That's the other thing. These memories, they remember the trauma, and when they're
Absolutely.
re-triggered, it can happen. You can see the reaction.
My point is, no matter how much you love your kid, and I'm sure everybody here just adores and wants the best for their kids, but people who are late talkers are usually have some kind of thing that makes them different from other people, some kind of disability. And disabled people are a marginalized group in our society. And I think that if you think your kid doesn't recognize that, then a lot of the time you're underestimating them, especially as they get older. And there's always going to be people who, because they are late talkers, because they are unconventional, dismiss them and disregard them and treat them poorly, and they notice that stuff, and it's going to affect how they behave going forward. I have a sort of different perspective. I have a lot of people who started in a similar way to the boy I work with, who are my friends and peers now, and who now can mask as, huge air quotes here, normal people, but they never stopped being themselves. and they never stopped feeling like people were dismissing them for being themselves, you know? And so it, there's a lot of, you know, feeling like, oh well, they're so clueless, they're in such bliss, they don't know like what they're lacking. Of course
Yeah.
they do. Like
Of course
of
they
course
do.
they have a hard time with it, and then
And I
when they
would
get
say
mad
even
about
more
it.
so, because I think that, people who have challenges, and we're just going to call them challenges instead of necessarily disabilities, because I think sometimes they're hyper abilities. It's just the society and them
That's,
integrating in
I'm sorry,
society
I
is
should
what's
clarify.
challenging.
Disability
So,
to me is a
yeah,
cultural concept. It's not
right,
actually lacking
exactly. Yeah,
anything. It's
they
that
know they're
society,
different.
yeah, society disables you by deciding you're disabled. It's not that you're
Yeah.
actually lacking abilities. I'm sorry, I'm
Right.
comfortable
But
with the term because a lot of my
but it
friends use
does come, Avi, you're absolutely right. They come from real challenges. I mean,
it.
if
Yeah,
these kids could walk or talk or think or do math in their head or whatever as good as other people or as good as they want to, because the reality is these kids really want to be better in the areas that they're challenged in.
of
But
course.
when they're pigeonholed or talked down to, or maybe even I think people try to work on the wrong things. Like you had said, you were working in other places where they're trying to do things. In fact, I even know this little boy's school, 9 years old, his language arts activities at school are labeling kitchen objects because he's a late talker. And,
His
you
poor
know,
mother's so frustrated. She's like, last week we read an article on string theory. Can they stop teaching him less and more? It's like, like she's the most like chill woman except for that. Like she's like, please, can they work up to his level? And I'm like, I hear you. Like it's ridiculous.
yeah,
It's so true. That's how it was at the last school I worked, where it's like, has it occurred to you that they're not doing this because
right.
they're too disabled, but that they're not doing it because they're bored out of their minds? Like
Yeah.
there was so
They
much of
think
that going on.
it's crazy. They're like, why are we even talking about this? What does this have to do with anything in
Oh
this
yeah.
room in my life right now? If we were in the kitchen talking about the items that we need to cook my own meal myself, now we're talking. This is STEM activity. This is let's figure it out and problem solve and measure and do these things. But five is more than two, and two is less than five at 9 years old for a kid who can practically do math in his head. you know it's frustrating, isn't it?
Well, and what gets to me is there's always this question for me of what's in it for them.
Yeah.
Every time in my experience we've met with like obstinance, I hate that word, but it's what they would call it. It was because I was thinking to myself, and I try always to start by getting in their shoes, and I would think to myself, oh, why the heck would I do this? You know, why would I bother? Because there's this paradox, right? Where, as I said, with the you have to listen even when it's not what you want to hear, you also have to encourage independence even when they're doing things you wouldn't recommend, you know. And so I would see these students and we'd teach them these so-called life skills. You know, do you know how frustrating it was to teach a 16-year-old how to ask for a snack, how to learn snack words, how to open the bag, and then when the guy stood up and went to grab his own snack that he brought from home, the whole staff would go, you know, oh well, he's not supposed to have that yet. It's like, you taught him how to get it. You have to, like, if you actually want an independent person, he should have the independence to go get 100 snacks. Like, it's not about you
And he should be
approving of what he's
happy
done.
that he is using these skills independently
Absolutely.
instead of trying to punish
You
him
know, the way
for
I was
being.
raised, my mother was fantastic, and I always remember the way she dealt with things that she didn't want us to do. She never pulled the, don't do that, I'm your mother. What she did was she explained the consequences of everything
Yeah.
that we were going to do. Is she would go, you could eat all your Halloween candy right now, but you'll feel terrible and you'll throw up. And we'd go, well, I don't want to feel terrible and throw up. I'm not going to do
Yeah.
that. And that's how I try to approach
Yeah,
things
and
of
then
like,
she
we
probably
could do
also
this.
presented the alternative, like, and you'll have
Yeah,
candy for 2 months if you eat 2 pieces a day. You'll still
yeah,
have candy by Christmas time,
exactly.
and you know,
It was for that, and there were times when, and this is what I really try to channel, is I hate when people are asked to do things that are hard for them for really arbitrary reasons when it's not benefiting anybody. What I try to emphasize, and my mother was really, really good about this, is there are times when something you are doing is making it harder for somebody else. And teaching that kindness and teaching that give and take is so important. My student, I'll be like, well, I know that you don't immediately understand how this benefits you, but I care about you and I'm your friend and it would benefit me. And to call upon that compassion. And in my experience, it is so rare that that compassion isn't there. We had a day
Right.
where he has a very loud stim that comforts him, very loud, very sudden. And I had a really bad overstimulation day. And every time he did it, I was just flinching, flinching, and flinching. And I explained to him, I said, there's nothing wrong with stimming, and I respect that it makes you feel better. But because it is hurting me, would you mind switching to something quieter? And he very notably lowered his volume for the rest of the day because I was giving him a real palpable reason. And sometimes it's a good enough reason to say it makes my life easier. But what was so frustrating about working in these schools is the things we were asking them to do, they didn't help us and they didn't help them. They were just completely arbitrary, and they were like looking at me like, why the heck am I doing this? And I had to just look back like, I don't know. The real reason is they're paying me to make you, but the good reason I can't tell you because I don't see one either. like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I can see why you left that job, Avi. It's the same job
very
that I
frustrating.
left too in the system where it's just like there has to be a better way to
Yeah, and
connect
it
with
it
these
can be
kids and do
concerning
it.
because I know that if I want to get deeper into this field, the conventional avenues are the easiest way to do it. But I'm hoping that I can work up to something like what you're doing, and that's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you so badly. Is I'm excited at the prospect of getting into this career and actually being able to help late learners in a way that I think is helping and not, frankly, just traumatizing and making nothing better. You
Yeah,
know?
I think honestly, if you are a parent and you live in the New York City area, Avi's going to be a very busy language facilitation
Yeah, just
practitioner.
this is great press. Thank you for recording this
I'm
and talking to
telling
me.
you, you are the ideal candidate. And here's why. I'm just going to label out because I want to talk about. So first of all, you're young and you're studying, but you're not studying child development. So all of the stuff that's coming out of those systems that you like went and worked for them and you're like, that's what people are teaching. You realize that that's not what you want to learn. You want to learn through equipping yourself with knowledge and support about something that you feel really good about. And the other thing that you feel really good about is language learning. And you know the challenges, and you think it's fun to learn new
Yeah,
languages and compare in your head. And is this language or this language, and all different kinds of things. And that's what's
I
going
love
on
that stuff.
every minute in the mind of a late talking kid. Which language do I use? Do I swat this time or do I use my words? Do I need to stim right now? Or am I listening? Can I listen? All those things are going through their head, and you have the experience of being a listener. So if like you said, when you don't know any language super well, you're a late talker across the board. So if you traveled to Spain or Italy or France or any of these languages that you knew a little bit about, you'd feel very much like your
Very much the
client
same.
in that
Yeah.
environment. Yeah, because you knew enough to get by and make your needs met because that's what your client's able to do. But when it comes to discussion or expressing feelings and all of that, it's a much higher level of language competency you need. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that you can just relate to this idea of I have things to say, I am important, I'm thinking, I'm processing, I'm smart, and I want everybody to know, but I don't have any language. I don't have
Yeah.
the language to
I
do
mean,
it.
I
Yeah.
I still struggle with that. You happen to have me on a very good day, and as you can see, I on a good day I carry the English language really quite well. But I still have phases of complete nonverbal episodes where I understand what it's like to want to communicate so badly and not have the words.
Can you describe how that feels to you?
It's very much I don't know. It is difficult to describe. I think that something that is very important to hear is, as somebody who can vocalize it now, I not only I understand every single thing that's going on when I'm in these nonverbal episodes. It doesn't alter my perception at all. And I can even think inside my head what I would like to say if I felt like I could. But there is this sort of block that occurs that makes that it degrades as my day gets harder. Usually it's stress triggered, and it'll start with like a stammer, or like I can't make eye contact as well. And then if it's fully degraded, I just like, you could ask me an urgent question and I couldn't even give you a yes or no. And it what's frustrating is a lot of the time the hardest part is not being in that position in general, but how people treat you when you're in that position. And people, it's not that they're just outright unkind to me, it's that you feel very invisible when you can't talk. And I find myself in those situations where my mood is fine. I just don't have words at that moment. And I look at these conversations and I'm thinking to myself, there are things that if I was having a better day, I would contribute, but it's just too fast. And the stammer's too bad. And I kind of have to sit on the sidelines until it passes. And I think it's really, like, if I could give one word of advice, just in general, like, I know you don't just focus on autism, but that's sort of the path I'm headed. If you have an autistic child, hire and work with autistic people. They really get it. So many of my friends have varying disabilities, or things that make them different, to avoid that word, but you know that I mean it in good heart.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it is so important to have somebody who has dealt with these challenges, got far enough, and they really do exist. That's the trouble. People think that if a person who starts as a late learner can make it to college, can make it to a career life, then there must be some sort of catch. They must not really have had it as bad as your kid. It's absolutely not true. You can learn to talk as well as I'm talking when you're 12 years old or 15 years old or 20 years old. And these people, they never forget what it's like. And if I wasn't this way, I would have such a harder time connecting to people who were. Because when they complain about things that the average person doesn't relate to, when they say, oh, sounds are too loud, or talking's too hard, or I hate the way this person makes eye contact with me, all I can think is, yeah, I've been there, you know, because I have, because I have, and that's
Yeah.
so much of the
And
job.
something as simple as I hate the way this person's making eye contact with me. And
Yeah,
and and they take that as so sensitive, right? As an offense or an anger or, a judgment or whatever.
I
And I
hate the
think,
eye contact pushing. I have had to stop so many people. They'd be like, look at me, look at me. I'm like, he'll look when he wants to look. Like, don't start.
and you say something great. I mean, that's what I always say. Like, if somebody says something remarkable, you can't help but look right at them. You're like, what did you say?
Yeah,
You either agree with them or it's remarkable or something like that, either too wild or too whatever. If it's interesting, they'll
yeah.
look.
And the trouble is when people struggle with things that other people don't struggle with, those struggles are all you see. And
Yeah.
I am a person who shares a lot of struggles. I have a hard time with interruptions in routine, very hard. I mean, good example is my subway station's been all whacked up for weeks, and it's been just awful not knowing when my train's gonna show up. And I do have a hard time with eye contact on some days, and all these things, right? Where people say, oh, they're this terribly mysterious, like, different people thing. But also, there are two sides of every coin. And because I'm so ritual oriented, I'm also very organized. And
Yeah.
because I have a hard time with interpersonal connection, I also stand up for myself and don't end up in situations I don't want to be in. And there's all these positives that it feels like people, when they see somebody who has these fallbacks, the only positives they can see are the really obvious ones, like, the classic idiot savant of, oh, he plays piano really well. Well, sure, that's great, but at the same time, he also just, where it becomes harder to be a person, something else always compensates, you
Right.
know? And that's very
Yeah.
true of the boy I work with. He's
Yeah.
very
I think
smart.
We just talked recently about how his mom believes that he's 2E or twice exceptional. In fact, I would encourage you, if you're going to pick up a new vocabulary word that you'll use instead of that
Ooh.
disability word, is exceptional. Because these people they might not be good at the thing that you're judging, but they are exceptional at something
Yeah.
else.
I
And
I do
I think
I don't
that's
know.
true.
I agree, but a lot of my friends, part of the reason the word disability gets used is because not because they want to emphasize what they're lacking, but they want to emphasize how society has put them in that box. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? That's the way I
Yeah,
tend
I
to
see
use it.
that.
Because I think sometimes, and I'm not accusing you of this, of course, because I think
Yeah.
I really agree with what you're going with here, but I think sometimes that exceptional thing can come from a place of condescension, and a lot of the
Mm,
times I've had friends who heard that, and then they'd be like, okay, can I get accommodations? No, you know,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's an
Or,
important
and you
piece
know
of
what
it
it
too.
does? It kind of minimizes the challenges. Like if you're so exceptional, you should
Yeah,
just
just
get
fix it.
over it and you might not need real assistance. I can see how that can hold you
Yeah.
up because, yeah,
Yeah,
because
so I
there
definitely
really are.
agree that
It's not to
disabled
say
is
that
a
these kids,
complicated word. It's
yeah,
just that
yeah, it's a
I
wrong.
want you to understand that I'm not coming from a place of person who is not able to do as many things. The word
Right.
disabled refers to a verb of having been disabled by your society who refuses to give you accommodations. And in a society that did give you accommodations, you wouldn't be disabled because you'd have the accommodations. But
You
people don't
could
give them
not
to
have
you.
said it any better,
Yeah.
Avi. That
I,
was the perfect, and I think, like you said, it's not so much shying away from using it because that gets into that toxic positivity. It's like, oh,
yeah,
so now you're just demeaning the fact that I do have challenges and I am smart and good enough to come through them, but I need assistance. That's why I'm here to have your expertise to help me. And that's what
absolutely.
the language facilitation practitioner does. With a whole range of waves of communication resources, from free content to customized coaching, you now have access to everything you need to elevate spoken language to infinite success. You are welcome to get your journey started with my 11-week language facilitation journey to speech workbook. You can access this workbook and all of the language facilitation resources on my website, wavesofcommunication.com.